All right, we are going to get started. Did we have any takers for the question? What is something that's working? Oh, mutual aid. Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks, Annabelle. Mutual aid. Annabelle, do you want to come off mute for a second and just talk about mutual aid for a second and what's working in
Okay,
Kentucky?
hi.
Hi.
Forgive if you can hear my cat purring in the background. Mutual aid was the first thing that came to mind when asking what works for our community. I'm based in a more urban part of Kentucky, but my roots come from the rural parts, and in those, there aren't a lot of programs that are at full force right now, thanks to national circumstances that can, like, all-encompassingly serve our communities. But especially for our lower income folks, there are a lot of amazing mutual aid organizations here. Uh, and they're very decentralized. They're not charities. The money goes directly from donations to the people that they serve. One that comes to mind is, say, Eastern Kentucky Mutual Aid. There are a lot of different ones like that, especially in our Appalachian region. There are quite a few. And they help with those basic necessities and even doing what they can to get people out of homelessness or out of being unsheltered, etc. So that's one thing that's
Fantastic.
working somewhat for us. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And the purpose of this exercise was just to disrupt, the patterns we tend to think in as journalists about, just focusing on what's wrong, and what's broken, because we're going to be doing something a little different today, and we're really excited to have you all here with us. So my name is Jessel Noor. It's great to see everyone on the meeting. We have 96 people on here, which is, I think, a record for any trainings that I've hosted. So exciting to be with you all here today. I'm the Democracy Cohort Manager for Solutions Journalism Network. And this training is part of the Advancing Democracy Initiative, which brings together Trusting News. Joy Mayer is here from Trusting News. Hey, Joy. Harkin, as well as Good Conflict. And it brings together skills like engagement and trust and transparency, and solutions journalism to give newsrooms really all the skills and strategies they need to do really impactful reporting that goes beyond problems, that goes into trust building and goes to deep engagement, to really rebuild that trust with communities. So we're really excited to be with you all here today, and we're going to be talking about more opportunities. This is not a one-off training. This is part of a bigger project we're working on with a lot of resources, which I'm going to share about in just a minute. Before we get started, there are several training opportunities coming up the next couple of weeks. One is being hosted by Tina Rosenberg, my colleague at SJN, and another one is part two of this training. And so you're going to get details on all of this in the follow-up email with the recording after this meeting is over. And I mentioned that we have more programs and more things happening. And so one of them is our innovation fund. We'll drop a link in the chat. But I know we're doing a lot of different programs to help newsrooms around the country right now, and really having some really exciting and promising results. So our agenda for today is listed here, but essentially our goal for today is to really have everyone really feel like they have a solid understanding of solutions journalism, and feel really confident that you're ready for these next trainings coming up, and feeling really confident that you understand what it is and are ready to do solutions journalism stories. Is anyone else hearing that sound? Yeah. Okay. I want to try
Yes, I'm
to
trying to figure it out.
Okay, we're gonna try to figure out what's going on with that sound, so I apologize for that. But we'll just try to ignore it for now, and hopefully it goes away. But so we're gonna get to why we're here now. For decades, we know that journalists have practiced journalism in a way that is focused on problems. And there's been a movement away from that to tell stories with not only a problem lens, but in a way that truly serves communities and builds trust between news organizations. Because we know focusing on problems creates an atmosphere of powerfulness. And one of the reasons I put together this training is because I heard from a lot of beat reporters, and I'm a former beat reporter myself, that we understand this problem and we want to do something differently. So this training is the first part in this two-part series that will give you the skills you need to do solutions journalism in your beat. And the great thing about being a beat reporter is that you have your beat, you have your expertise, you have your sources, so you're really well positioned to be doing solutions journalism, and you might even be doing solutions journalism and might not even know it. Um, I have my first story in the solutions journalism tracker was actually published before I even knew what solutions journalism is. So you all might be doing solutions journalism, but the point of this training is to really give you the strategies and the best practices and a deep understanding of what it is so we can start implementing it in your practice. So journalism has been going through a transformation in the last 15 years. Um, Journalists are really good at diagnosing what's wrong, rooting out the bad apples, and we're really good at talking about the bad news. But this has come at a cost. And so, according to the 2025 Reuters Institute Digital Report, 42% of Americans now avoid the news because it leaves them feeling powerless, overwhelmed, and worn out. And this is not just a trend in the US, this is an international trend. But there is something we can do about it, right? We know journalism is facing a lot of different crises. We know a lot of newsrooms are facing cutbacks, but journalists still have some agency. And the newsrooms we work with have shown that newsrooms that integrate solutions journalism, that integrate trust and transparency and engagement, have stronger public engagement and reach, enhanced credibility, and it's better for journalism and it's better for the journalists themselves. So now we're going to get into what solutions journalism is. I've hinted at it a little bit, but we're going to get into the definition. And before we do that, I wanted to make sure you all had a chance to open up the worksheet I created for this training. You should have it in the reminder email that I sent out before this meeting, but we'll also drop a link in the chat in just a moment. This is a read-only file, so just go to File and make a copy to save your own copy. But this worksheet will allow you to work along with what we're doing in the training, and write down your own definition of solutions journalism, write down key notes about like the different 4 pillars, and it has other resources and links in there. But just click that link Joy put in the chat and save your own copy, and you can go from there. So solutions journalism. The way Solutions Journalism Network defines solutions journalism is rigorous evidence-based reporting on responses to social problems. And so this really gets at the heart of solutions journalism. The way SJN defines it, we're not the only organization to define and practice it, but this is our framework, and we found it really helpful and really all-encompassing, and something that journalists all over the world can really understand and really work behind. So another way to think about it is solutions journalism is reporting on something that's happening now and the effects it's producing. So here are 2 examples of stories that we work with newsrooms in. The first is the Salt Lake Tribune. The second is the Texas Standard, both addressing really well-known problems. First is the housing crisis. Second is adult literacy, but highlighting what's being done, where progress is being made, what's moving the needle in addressing these problems. So these are examples of solutions journalism. Another great definition I came across recently is from Gene Son from the Philadelphia Journalism Collaborative. He said that solutions journalism is reporting that seeks to shed light on what is not working properly and looking at options and ideas to address it. Why that is so important has everything to do with the people we are trying to serve, along with the journalists doing the work. Reporting that takes a solutions approach is better received, works against news fatigue, which we just talked about, and helps people see that there are approaches to addressing persisting problems. There are things you can do about the problems we are facing, and that is the heart of solutions journalism. And it's a really powerful asset for beat reporters as well. So I was a beat reporter that used solutions journalism in my work when I was a staff reporter. Now as a freelancer, I'm able to do freelance stories because they're solution stories, because other people aren't reporting these stories. So it's another tool in the toolkit. It's another tool in the arsenal, whether you're a freelancer, whether you're a staff reporter. we know that communities want solutions journalism. So it helps understand problems on your beat and how communities are addressing them. It creates agency around solving local challenges. We heard earlier about mutual aid organization. Many have existed for a long time around the country, and more are popping up. And so solutions journalism gives a way to do rigorous reporting on these responses to social problems. And it also takes away reasons to feel hopeless about persistent issues in your coverage area. In Baltimore, I know lots of problems. The problems are pretty well known. We have, crime, housing inaffordability. We have tons and tons of challenges. But people who live in Baltimore want to know about what's being done about it, right? They're living the problem, but they want to see where change is being made. So that is what is at the heart of solutions journalism. It's showing communities, where there are actionable responses, whether it's in your community or a different one. There are 4 fundamental pillars of solutions journalism. And this is a great opportunity to open up your worksheet if you do want to work along. But essentially, the 4 pillars are start with response. And this is really the heart of a solution story. About 80% of a story will focus on the response. It is what is actually being done to respond to the problem. The response is, for example, we heard earlier about the mutual aid, mutual aid organizations popping up. So the mutual aid, what they're actually doing is the response. We looked at that housing affordability story. The housing affordability program is the response. The other headline was about adult education and how a program is making progress in tackling it in Texas. So it's the adult literacy program that's the response to the adult literacy crisis. Another key pillar is evidence. So we want to have evidence, qualitative, quantitative, that these programs are effective. We're not just talking about intentions. We're not talking about future plans. We're talking about responses that have evidence. And we'll talk about evidence later, but so that is really important in a solution story. Third pillar is insight, and we'll talk more about these pillars shortly, but the third pillar is insight, and it shows what can be learned about it, right? Like what can be learned, what can your community or another community take away from this response and from the evidence, and why it's relevant to them. And finally, limitations. This is the main difference between a solution story and like a puff piece or a feel-good story, is that you're also centering shortcomings. You're not just talking about what this response is doing, but you're talking about the shortfalls and shortcomings as well. If there are no silver bullets when you're doing solutions journalism, tackling the biggest social problems we face, there's not going to be one story that explains how this issue was solved, right? Most likely, there's going to be generally incremental change, and there's going to be limitations on what can be achieved. Often limitations can be around money or just funding, and so we'll talk more about that as well. But that is another key pillar. All right, so why these 4? A response is worth featuring if it's if it's newsworthy, essentially. We're trying to focus on systemic responses because we're dealing with systemic problems. You could be describing an act by an individual or a group, but the story is really focused on what they're doing, not the individuals themselves. We're not doing profiles on groups or individuals. Evidence is key. Again, we're not just talking about intention, we're talking about what the actual results are. And evidence can be a great place to start a solution story, because if you don't have evidence, then you just have intention. You just have good intentions, which a lot of people have. But if you have evidence, then you can examine the evidence and really get a sense of whether this response is having a newsworthy effect or not, and how effective it is. Insight, again, what others can learn from it, and we're fulfilling our mission to inform the citizens and residents in this democracy. and you want to make, and the limitations are the key part that connect it to journalism beyond just the storytelling. We're not promoting any response. We're examining it through rigorous journalism. So again, those are the four main pillars. We'll talk more about them in a bit. Um, so when we're talking about solutions journalism, it's really a shift in how we approach the story. Um, so the old way isn't working, and we know that in a lot of our communities. So we can talk about one way people say it's working better, and so that's how you sort of frame the story around what people are doing to address those problems. Another example, the old way, the problem focused reporting um, tends to focus on what causes problems. Solutions reporting focuses on how people are addressing it. Um, problem focused reporting, focuses on making sure we're aware of what's broken, which is really important. But solutions reporting helps us understand, again, what is being done to address those problems. And an example could be a group says they have a way to fix this problem we're facing, and so the reporting focuses on where the evidence is and whether that evidence is whether they have something that stands up to scrutiny that can be replicated elsewhere. So a big question we often get is solutions journalism advocacy? Um, and and so that's this is a big question we get, and there are ways to ensure solutions journalism doesn't veer into the realm of advocacy. Um, we don't overclaim. We don't predict the future. We're reporting on what we know through verifiable evidence, right? We're doing our jobs as journalists. Um, we're not saying, we're not endorsing a particular response. We're not saying this is the right way or the only way. We're examining a response and we're reporting on what the response is. Um, and again, we're not doing hero worship. Focusing on, we're not like profiling individuals. We're not profiling programs. We're making the story about like what they're actually doing, their actions, what their response to the problem is. And we include limitations as well as unknowns. And we're transparent with our readers and viewers about what we know and what we don't know. We don't always have all the evidence we want, but we can circle back with our audience once we know more information, but we can let them know what we do know. All right, so a quick exercise. We just talked about solutions journalism and problem-focused reporting. So type your response in the chat, but don't hit enter yet. We're going to take 60 seconds. And I'm going to see if anyone can write down in 60 seconds a description of what is the key difference between solutions journalism and problem-focused reporting. So type up your response. Don't hit enter. We have about 27 seconds left. All right. All right. If you have an answer in the chat, please hit enter. Okay. We got lots of responses. All right, let's see. Solutions journalism, presenting ways it can improve, presenting ways it can improve, problem-focused reporting is the causes, okay? Solutions journalism acknowledges a problem, it spends more time unpacking ways to address it rather than focusing on all the harms the problem is causing. Great. Thank you, Daniel. Alice, solutions journalism examines the effort to address problems and examines them critically. Fantastic. That's a great way to put it. Arjun, problem-focused reporting is a long-standing standard approach, identifying broad issues in the community. Solutions journalism goes a step further and tries to identify solutions to those issues. Fantastic. All right, so I think you guys really get it. And yeah, Kayla highlighting where progress is made, showing actionable responses to issues and challenges. Fantastic. We got the fundamentals of solutions journalism. That is great. So let's take a minute and we're going to look at an example of solutions journalism. Oftentimes we think of solutions journalism as, stories that are thousands of words long, but they don't have to be. Solutions journalism can be done in a minute. And I'm going to play a video that came out of a recent fellowship we did. And this video is actually a social media component of the housing story I had highlighted earlier. But in about 90 seconds, I think, the reporter does a great job of highlighting all 4 pillars. So we're going to watch this real quick, and then we're going to break it down afterwards together. And I'll just ask some volunteers to share what they think are the 4 pillars. So response, evidence, insight, limitation. If you have your worksheet open, the second page has the 4 pillars chart, so you can take notes in there if you like. All right.
If you're under the age of 30 and you don't own a home now, you have about an 8 or 9% chance to buy a home in the next 10 years. Our young generation does not have the opportunity to get in on the ground floor.
I read about a state program that's supposed to make it easier for developers to build housing by having cities and counties remove barriers. There are definitely parts of the state where it's working, but it depends on how far cities and counties are willing to go. It ends up applying to 95 roughly cities and counties, and it's about 90% of the state's population. So most of the state population-wise is covered. This program is definitely working to make it easier in some cases to build housing, but it has to be part of an overall strategy. Housing prices are not going to drastically dip. There's kind of this sense that officials know they kind of need to keep doing more and more.
All right, so that was a really tight, very short social media video on a topic, affordable housing, which is a crisis everywhere. And actually, in the last 3 years that Joy and I and our other partners at Advancing Democracy have worked with newsrooms, dozens of newsrooms, that is consistently the top issue with all the newsrooms in all the newsrooms we serve in their communities. So this is a well-known problem, right? People want to know what can actually be done about it. Do we have any volunteers that want to talk about what the response is that was described here? And before we talk more about the story, so that obviously was a very well produced video by the Salt Lake Tribune, which has a great social media team. But what's really exciting about this video is that it got over 300,000 views on social media. It became their most popular video ever. Because it was providing, it was well-produced video, but it was providing something new and engaging for their audience about this problem that they're all dealing with and showing where some progress is being made. So just wanted to share that because I'm really proud of their work. All right, so any volunteers, what is the response? What was the response that was highlighted in this story? You can enter it in the chat or you can come off mute. What was the response?
The response was, I believe, a new policy that folks in wherever the Salt Lake Tribune's located at, to make housing easier, I assume to remove like specific permits or barriers to make housing more easy to build, I suppose.
Exactly. No, exactly. It was a new government program that had made it easier to build housing. Exactly, right? And does anyone remember what the evidence was? What kind of evidence they have? You might not remember the specific evidence, but what kind of evidence And so this, okay, so the struggle getting houses built, that's the problem, right? So the story was focused on what was being done about it. Does anyone remember what the evidence was they shared?
Wasn't it about 90%? It affects about 90% of people in the state, the moderate income housing problems for the moderate income households.
Yes. So yeah, so there's a percentage of people that were covered, and the reporting also goes into like the reporting actually does a great job of telling the stories of the people whose lives were affected too. So there's a region, there's like 95% of counties covered, but it's actually making an impact. It's helping lead to increased houses being built. So that was the evidence they were able to highlight. Insight. Does anyone have an idea? So thank you. Any idea for the insight? What was the insight from that story? And there's not necessarily like a right or wrong answer, but I'm just curious. Does anyone think of what the insight might be? So this one, the insight can be like the toughest pillar, but insight, we're trying to think about what can be learned, from this, from our community or other communities. And so the real insight was, or at least one of the insights was, that when the government takes action to make housing easier to build, it can result in more housing being built, right? So that was like a key lesson, a key insight or lesson from it. Limitations. Limitations can also be a little trickier, can be sometimes a little trickier, but one of the limitations was that people still, housing is still, okay, you got Danielle. Limitation was that it should be in the overall strategy and housing problem. Yes, it's not. Limitation was it's not going to solve, making housing easier to build is not going to solve the housing crisis on its own, but it can be part of it, right? It's not gonna like give people the money. It does not magically create the money people need to put down payments or pay their mortgage, right? But it can be a part of it. Great. So I wanted to show you that story because it's a great example of doing solutions journalism in 90 seconds. It doesn't have to be, a 30-minute documentary, which I've done actually, and it's a lot of work. It doesn't have to be thousands of word stories, which I've also done. You can do it. You can get those 4 pillars in 90 seconds, in a minute, and we have a lot of examples of that as well. Another question we often get asked: how do I find the best solution story? How do I know that I am doing the best solution story? And you can't. You can't because it doesn't exist, right? If they're, as a reporter, you're focused on illustrating the different approaches people are taking to solve those problems. And putting your reporting lens to that problem. There is never going to be the best solution story, but it's important just to find a place you can start. And a great place to do that, as I mentioned, is to look for where there's evidence and go from there when you're starting out. This is a resource that's linked to in the worksheet, but we have tips for reporters that are registered. And so it was interesting. Almost 500 people registered. The beats that were mentioned in the quiz were just local community, health, environment, climate, and human rights and justice. And so all those beats are well represented in solutions journalism. There's stories you can do to cover all those beats, and the tips are really all the same. As beat reporters, you have a Rolodex of sources, right? Talk to them about solutions journalism. Talk to them about solutions. Explain to them what solutions journalism is, and let them know that you're also looking to do stories on how, like, what is making progress, right? Promising new programs. If there's a new program in your community, there won't be evidence in your community, but that program was likely built off of something tried somewhere else. And so there may likely be evidence somewhere else. Think of, so that's a really great way to start. start talking to your sources about it. Look at every different topic on your beat for a potential response. See who's working to address that problem. Organize research using the 4 pillars to make sure you don't avoid any missing key ingredients. Again, the second tab on your worksheet has that chart of the 4 pillars. And you still want to do strong storytelling, right? So you want to focus on characters and focus on a couple pieces of strong evidence rather than an overwhelming amount of data. You still want to tell a compelling story. All right, so Catherine has a question. Limitations, but is it being used for the people it's aimed at and not luxury buildings? Right. So that's a great question. So solutions journalism is a great way to examine responses and see if they are credible or not, right? If there is a program that is supposed to tackle affordable housing, but it's going to support luxury buildings, then that is not a real solution, right? So you can look at the evidence, you can look at its effectiveness, you can talk to the people impacted, and you can look at the limitations, right? And the limitations might be that it actually isn't helping the people it was intended. So that sort of could vary between a limitation and just like a fundamental failure of the response itself. So it sort of depends how you report out the story. All right, so we've learned the fundamentals of solutions journalism. We've looked at a couple examples. So where do you start? That can be the toughest thing. Where do you actually start? And again, you're doing this training because you're a beat reporter. So so talk to your sources, try to identify a response, right? Who is doing something to address the problem that you are working, the problem that your community is facing, that you're reporting on. Identify who is, individuals or groups that are working to address it. Then look for evidence. If you don't have evidence, you're not going to have a solution story. And you can be qualitative evidence, quantitative evidence, and this is another part of the worksheet. So if you are going along the worksheet, you can fill this out here, and make sure you satisfy each pillar. So again, I will emphasize using that 4-pillar worksheet really goes a long way in making sure you're staying on track and getting everything you need to do a really strong solution story. And so this is that worksheet right here. It's really the 4 pillars, but we added these 2 just to help you stay organized. So you start with the problem or a piece of the problem, write out the response you'll be working on. You can write down the evidence you have and the evidence you want. You can keep a running list. You can have limitations or caveats, and that's another great thing to talk about sources about. Another great thing to include in interviews, and we have some questions in the worksheet about that. And the how done it is really the mechanics of the response. How does it actually work? When you're talking to sources, you can ask them to explain, you can ask them, like, if someone wanted to replicate this response in their community, what would they have to know? What would they have to do? And so that's how you can get the response. And then what can the story teach us? The insights and lessons. So that's a really great way. That's one of the big tips I give folks. And I'll just say that I'm not, everything I'm saying here, we have taught this to dozens of newsrooms, and Solutions Journalism Network over a dozen years has worked with hundreds of newsrooms and thousands of journalists. And I've also, applied these into my own work. I have something like 20 stories in the tracker. So I've used these tips that make my reporting process a lot easier too. So I just wanted to explain where I'm referencing these tips from. Another really, really important tip is to take a small slice, right? You're talking about a massive social problem like, affordable housing, adult literacy, lack of access to food. Take a small slice. Trying to address that whole thing is going to be too big for one story. Start off with a small slice that you can break off in one story and then go from there. And often it can be incremental. Is there a program doing things a little better in terms of less waste? Is there more accountability? Is it more equitable? Is it more efficient? Are there better results for marginalized communities, for young people? These are all questions we can ask ourselves when we're identifying what our response is. And you want to have strong characters. You want to have, that is ultimately the heart of good storytelling, is finding people that are relatable, finding people that have a powerful story, and that, that highlight the results of the response, and show what impact that can have. And a great example of that was in the Salt Lake Tribune, the story we looked at earlier. They did a whole series where they talked to people whose lives were affected by being able to own a home for the first time, right? It was really, really powerful and transformative for those people that were affected by it. But again, we're not doing a profile. You're using these characters to tell this bigger story. You're still talking about limitations and evidence and all of that. But personal stories can be really powerful and great ways to get into what the response is and how it works. A great resource that I mentioned before is the Solution Story Tracker. And so since this screenshot was taken, several thousand more stories have been added. So I think it's close to 20,000 stories now. And I've searched all the beats that people had registered for when they had entered, when they registered for the training. And there are solution stories related to just about all those beats people mentioned. So if you, there will be a link to the tracker there's a link to the tracker in the resource, in the worksheet, and there'll be one in the email. But if you just go to the tracker, type in the topic you're reporting on, and you can also do the advanced search and sort by country and language. There's lots of really, really strong examples of solutions journalism, and that's often like a really great place to start when you're starting your reporting. Looking at some examples of stories, it's a good place to find information about. Oh, thanks, Lita, for putting that link in there. You can sort by topic, area of the response. So it's a great way to find research and data and evidence, great way to find sources, great way to learn about new initiatives that you might not have heard that your community may want to learn about. So one of the beats that I've developed, actually with the help of solutions journalism, is reporting on worker cooperatives. And that's a recent story I did about worker cooperatives and how over the last few years they've been able to grow pretty significantly in Baltimore. And so an easy follow-up for me to do as a freelance reporter is look at who's doing it better than Baltimore. So an example of that is Cleveland, where so Baltimore worker co-ops get very little funding from the city's large anchor institutions or the city government, whereas in Cleveland, large anchor institutions like the Cleveland Clinic do all their business through, like for example, laundry through a worker cooperative. And so that allows worker cooperatives to scale up. And so that's a story that I can now tell for a Baltimore audience by reporting on like what Baltimore can learn from what's happening in this other city. So whether you're, as I said, freelancer or a staff reporter, this is a great way to start looking at where there's responses, where there's things that are happening that your community can learn from. And these questions are mostly listed in your worksheet, but some key questions for reporting stories is how does the response work, right? And oftentimes people you're talking to might not have been interviewed by someone who's doing a solution story. So if they do a lot of media interviews, you might have to even if they do a lot of media interviews, you might have to just let them know that you're doing something a little different, and you want to really dig into like how this is working. Where this idea came from is another great question. Does it have if it's a new program being proposed in your community, does it have a track record elsewhere? What metrics matter when it comes to defining success, and what does the research say? Oftentimes, the people closest to the problem and the response will know this data. They'll know the folks working on it, and have a good sense of like where you can start looking for those key things. And so you want to make sure you talk about limitations. So what part of the problem aren't being addressed by the response is a great way to get limitations. What do critics say? What are the barriers to replication? Limitations are important because we're not talking about silver bullets here. We're doing rigorous reporting. We're talking about what this response can do and what it can't do. And so limitations are really key. So evidence is a really important pillar, and it's worth talking a little more about in our last few minutes together. So there's qualitative and quantitative evidence. The key really is to try to gather a wide range of evidence. And again, your sources can be can help with that. You can go to the tracker, but just a good Google search can help you find research, and also just talking to people affected by the problem or the response can be a great way, because again, qualitative and quantitative, you want to have a range of evidence. So in terms of vetting evidence, you want to examine evidence. If someone gives you evidence, you just don't want to take it on its, take it on its face value. You want to examine it, see if you're looking at a research paper, see who was authored by, just the standard ways we vet evidence. You want to make sure that you are, examining that evidence, and key things on how to use evidence. Don't overclaim or try to predict the future. You can talk about what has happened in the past, what has happened elsewhere, what's happened in your community, but again, to avoid getting into the realm of advocacy, stick to what we know. And when we don't know something, be transparent around that. Joy can testify to the fact that audiences love transparency, so it's really important to be transparent with them. And graphs and data visualizations can be great when you have lots of evidence and you don't want to just, it's great to visualize it instead of spending several paragraphs on it necessarily. And then be careful about causation and correlation. Again, we want to be rigorous in how we use evidence. So we have a quick pop quiz. Give everyone a minute here. Evidence. So in terms of evidence, pop quiz. And so work on your answer, put it in the chat, but don't hit enter yet. So can evidence in solution stories, A, only come from peer-reviewed studies? B, isn't enough until all the research is completed, sometimes years and decades after an effort began? Or C, includes information from sources that aren't involved in the effort? So includes independent evidence. And yes, Danielle, the presentation is actually already linked in the worksheet. So you have all of this stuff and you'll also be getting the recording, so don't worry about that. All right, so A, B, or C? Evidence, can it only come from peer-reviewed studies? Is it enough until all research is complete, or includes information from sources that aren't involved? I think C's are unanimous here, and that's great. You want to have independent research, independent evidence from folks that aren't involved in evidence. Oh, I have a couple B's. So the reason why B isn't correct because even if the research hasn't been completed on a new initiative that is on a new initiative, if that initiative was based on a previous effort, you can report on what the evidence, the evidence that does exist. And if that effort has been around for 5 years, then you can be transparent. Like this effort is 5 years in, we have 5 years of evidence, and you can be transparent about that and still maintain that rigor we're looking for when we're doing this solutions journalism. So congrats on most of you for getting it right. And for the folks that said B, I can understand that, but I hope that explanation helped explain it. Yes, the answer is C. All right. So let's review real quick, because this is something that people do get stuck on. So let's take another minute and write your response in the chat box, but don't hit enter. How is solutions journalism distinct from advocacy? We'll take a minute here and take a minute. We'll take about another 30 seconds. And give you all a chance to write your response. There's no real right or wrong answer. All right, you can hit enter if you have a response. All right, so we have solutions journalism, doesn't predict the future, great. Doesn't promote, that's great. Doesn't claim the solution is a sole answer, fantastic. It's a more critical lens. Yes, you don't want to advocate for a specific side of the story. And it's about what has been done. Great. Don't endorse a specific response. Focuses on responses to problems, whereas advocacy promotes a cause or issue. Solutions journalism about research and fact finding. Advocacy pushes for specific solutions to a problem in a specific side of the story. Great. Doesn't promote a specific agenda or organization. Great. So this exercise is worth reviewing, because this is often, once you start doing solutions journalism, this might be a question you get asked, right? So it's good to see some different responses and really think about what you're, think about this as you're doing it. All right, so now we have some time for questions. We got through this whole presentation, which I wasn't expecting to. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. And yeah, thank you all. Really appreciate it. And I do have a quiz for you, which should pop up. I'm curious how confident you feel that you could do a solution story after this. And it's okay if you need more training or more practice. As I mentioned, we have a lot more resources available that we'll be offering you in the follow-up email. But it is great to see folks that are feeling very confident. It's great. And this isn't so these trainings are something that, for me, including me, it's really helpful to come back to, especially when I'm stuck on a story, I can't make it work. It can be really helpful to come back and review this. All right, I see someone's hand up. Kingwa. Do you have a
Hi.
question?
Hello. Good evening from Kenya. So thank you. This was really, really good, and I really connect with it because, especially the hope aspect of things, it gives people a hope that things can get better. But and maybe this question is coming because my career has straddled civil society activism and media, and I've always been saying that media needs to do a lot more in terms of actually programming hope, especially in this dark time. So that's why my question is kind of like pushing back on the part of how solution journalism is a bit hesitant on proclaiming the future, or rather giving indicators on what is possible for the future. So the question is kind of like to temper myself, like in terms of how do we make sure that we are kind of like not okay, and this is for me, how to make sure that we're not using journalism to maybe too Pollyanna for some of us who are very Pollyanna, and so how to temper that kind of instinct. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I would say the key really is to stick to what we know, right? So that was one of the things I tried to really emphasize. Report on what we know and how we know it, right? So if, for example, if there's a new proposal being announced in your community, you don't have evidence from your community, right? But you have evidence of what has happened when it's been tried elsewhere. And so that's what you can report on. You can report on what has been learned about how this has been tried elsewhere. But you don't, like, no one can predict the future, right? So you don't know you don't know how a new program, like what impact it's going to have on your community or a different community, right? So that, I think that's how I try to distinguish it. But and yeah, and I mean, I think also that's the great thing about journalism, right? You can think a cause is, you can think a cause shows promise, but you can still talk about the limitations. You can still talk about what it can't do, and so that's what I think is really powerful about journalism. You're not, because you're not promoting the cause, like your goal is really trying to inform your audience about what the reality is, right? You're not trying to sell them something that isn't going to deliver, right? You want to be honest about what this can, you want to be honest about what a response can do, what it can't do, and you're being transparent about how you know that. So that, I feel like that's how I would answer that question. That is a really important question. Sometimes we'll give, oh, sorry.
Assalamualaikum. I just want to ask that being working in a news platform, and I think that that the journalism has been fallen, that we don't do fact stories, we don't do research. So can you give some other advice to the young students and the people who are doing mass communication? They want to write an article, they want to do a story on based, and they want to do research, and if they are coming into a newsroom or in an editorial, so what are the basic principles and what are the basic rules that they should follow to become credible and to become a flawless journalism?
Yeah, so that's a good, yeah, I would say yeah, I would say yeah, if you're new to a newsroom, what can be really helpful, it would be really helpful to look at the reporting your newsroom has already done, right? Like what reporting has your newsroom already produced, and look at, start there, look at some of the beats that are already being covered, talk to some of those sources, and I would say that's a really great place to start if you're new to a newsroom and you're trying to get started. Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
I see some
Thank
more
you.
questions in the chat. So Catherine asked a question about would I need to run an evaluation, randomized evaluation on the community that it was tried in order to find out whether the policy works. Yeah, so that's a good question. I don't think, so you can, there's ways to do solutions reporting that don't, if you can have randomized evaluations, that's great. Most people don't have access to that, right? So when you're looking at when you're reporting on a response, ask the group or the person who's doing the response for evidence. Ask them how they measure success, and then you can examine that, right? So if they say like, we helped 20% of our, like I'm thinking of the adult literacy story. If we helped 50% of our students graduate with a high school certificate, then if that's their claim, then you can examine that claim by looking at like state data. You can talk to some of those people they identified as a way, as another way to do it. There's, you can look at data from city sources, from state sources. There's lots of different places, but I think so. The question about how much muster should the evidence pass, I think you want to use your best journalistic sense, and a great way. So other advice I would say in just a few seconds is that look at the story tracker for examples of stories and see what kind of evidence they used to get a sense of how different journalists sort of navigate that. We're not asked a question about links. Yes, I'll send you all these links that we dropped in the chat. So Danielle, the solution has only one beneficiary worth reporting. Key thing is systemic responses. So it's only helping one person. It's probably not worth it. What ethical discussions often occur, and how can we resolve them when we are part of the problem solvers? That's an interesting question. I don't know if I have the answer to that off the top of my head. How can I balance reporting the problem and the solutions without make it sound like promoting. So that's a really good, so some of these questions you're asking are great questions because we're going to tackle them in our next session, which is happening in 2 weeks, where we're going to talk to a beat reporter and a newsroom leader that actually implemented solutions journalism in their reporting. So some of these questions will be really good for them to answer because they have really like a lot of experience doing that in our next session. And you'll get those you'll get those links and all these, you'll get those links to those trainings and all the links we dropped in the chat in the follow-up email. But yeah, so we're almost out of time. So I want to thank you, everybody. Let everyone go a few minutes early. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. And look out for that follow-up email. Again, it'll have the recording, a link to that worksheet, and all of the resources and things we mentioned. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.